Okay. We'll let people trickle in, but let's kick it off. So this session is, again, offered through Thriving Minds, which is sponsored by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We thank them for their sponsorship so that we can deliver this PD series. And today, we're going to be going over needs assessment, resource mapping, and a little bit of how we can use that to inform professional development planning. I've introduced Ellie. I want to give a quick shout out to Paul. Paul is from BRYT program out of Rennie Center and part of this effort that we have called Thriving Minds. Thanks for the wave, Paul. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here. So I would love to see in the chat and to kind of get you started in engaging. If you could type your district and role in the chat, I would love to see kind of who we have here. And yeah, let's start with that. Quabbin Regional, thank you, Kristen. Cool, cool. Neighborhood House Charter School, thank you, Dana. Ipswich. Director of Student Services, we got Ashland, we got Granby, Berkshire. Very cool. Lots of names rolling in. And while you're doing that, I guess I'll ask this second question, like, what are you hoping to gain today? What brought you to this session around needs assessment and resource mapping? What are you hoping to be able to accomplish as a function of attending this session? What do we got? You can come off mute too. In fact, if you come off mute, the first person to do so gets a $1,000 gift card to Amazon that Ellie is going to provide you personally. No, Ellie? All right, that's fine. It's Ellie's fault. We talked about this earlier. Ideas around resource mapping. Cool. Thank you, Sean. Awesome. What else? What else are we hoping to gain? Friends, I have legendary wait time. 50 minutes, I will just be silent. Dawn, some real direction. Okay, you're going to get some real direction today for sure. Some practical ways in which we can move forward. New direction and effective resource management. Thank you for that, Beverly. Finding new ways to further support our students. Good. Evidence-based practice, how to measure progress. We've got lots of that going on through Thriving Minds. General ideas about how to establish comprehensive. You know, Gretchen, cool. We got you covered. Bite-sized resource mapping. Craig, well played. Yeah, we can scale up this resource mapping, but the tool I'm going to show you today is going to allow for you to like make moves immediately so that you can like get the work happening. And Lynn's like, where to begin? Lynn, it's good to see you. I'm glad you're here today. All right, let's roll. I want to make sure we get through all the slides. We've got, and like I said, several activities. This is what we're gunning for. This is what this PD series is all about. Comprehensive school mental health system. Another tiered system of support, but one that works in conjunction with all the other flavors of MTSS. Full array of mental health services and supports. At tier 1, think SEL, mental health literacy. We've got group therapy happening, individual therapy, wraparound partnerships with our community-based providers, and we have to use evidence-based practices, evidence-based services and supports. This is a system that is sensitive to our collaborative partnerships. We should bring our friends in. However, it's to augment what we have going on in our schools. This definition makes sense with me? Okay. Let's dig a little deeper into this. This is an updated definition that is more narrative. I appreciated this. I wanted to include this because I think it spells out what a comprehensive school mental health system, what it is across a lot of different domains. So I've highlighted some things in here. Social emotional learning. Sometimes people are like, well, we're talking about mental health. Social emotional learning and mental health are on the same continuum. I want you to think of SEL as tier 1 in a comprehensive school mental health system. Built on a strong foundation of district and school professionals. Think teaming. We've got community mental health, community health organizations part of the mix, right? Sensitivity to outside. And these systems also assess and address the social, political, environmental structures, public policies and social norms included, that influence mental health outcomes. So it's not just about practices. It's not just about teams and people. It's about policy and procedure as well. So we'll talk about all these things, but I think this definition is definitely instructive in terms of what we're gunning for with this program. These are the school mental health national quality assessment domains and indicators. These are the things that when you're doing your needs assessment, your systems level needs assessment, these are the things that we're going to orient to in terms of domains that we want to march forward. Things like teaming, things like the impact of our mental health system. And that includes things like actually documenting the impact of services. Who here, quick show of hands, feels really good about their ability to document the impact of mental health services on kids? We good? Yes or no in the chat? Don's like, I don't know. Not really. Yeah, it's hard to do. I shouldn't say that. It's easy to do with the right tools, and we'll give you those. How about marketing and advertising? Is that something that you got into the field to do? Probably not, but you got to do it, right? Like you got to market and advertise the impact of your program and what services are available. We just invested in some marketing and advertising materials. Why? And it felt a little weird, but makes sense now. If our kids and families don't know about the services we have to offer, they don't do anything. So it's about making sure that people know what you do and also the impact of those things that you do. Screening, the services we provide, needs assessment, resource mapping, we're going to hit that heavy today. You'd be sad without a triangle. You don't have to admit it, but I know it to be true. Every presentation has to have a triangle. And this one is about the services that you can expect happening across a tiered system of support. I mentioned this, right? Tier 1, we're looking at for all, by all. Everyone's responsible for social emotional learning and mental health literacy. It doesn't matter what your role is. When we get into tiers 2 and 3, we're talking about evidence-based therapeutic services, group therapy, individual therapy. At tier 3, I'm also going to point to things like BRYT program, BRYT program, right? Supporting students returning from long-term absence and clinical hospitalization or psychiatric hospitalization, rather. I want to be real clear at the outset. We label interventions. We don't label kids. We don't have tier 2 and tier 3 kids. We have kids who require tier 2 services, and our hope is that they won't require tier 2 services forever and that we can provide them with only tier 1 services. That's really critical. Thumbs up if you understand that. Make sense with me? Okay. So the core of what we're going to talk about today is needs assessment, resource mapping. I've kind of highlighted what that specific indicator looks like from the overview chart. We're going to assess student mental health needs, assess student mental health strengths. We're going to determine appropriate services and supports. We're going to look at what we have and what we don't have. We're going to align services and supports and systems. I like this definition: an attempt to assess or measure a perceived or actual need by collecting data to document a challenge that exists. We're looking with some of our needs assessments, and primarily the one we're going to talk about today, it's an assessment of needs of our system, our comprehensive school mental health system. What are the things it has? What do we not have? What do we need to build? What are the gaps? What are the bright spots? Needs assessment is contextual, though. What I'm going to share with you today is the SHAPE system, which is going to provide some contextual needs assessment around systems level things. We also need to assess the needs of our staff relative to their capacity to deliver evidence-based practices. We can look at a presenting problems and SEL needs assessment. What do our kids need the most? Staffing needs assessment. Do some resource mapping. At the end of the day, this topic is really about what are the resources that we can draw upon? What resources do we need? What policies and practices do we need to develop? We can't get a handle on the next steps for our planning if we don't know what our targeted areas of need are, what our bright spots are, the things that we can move on quickly, the things that we need to be intentional about moving. When we do this well, we're able to identify staff who perhaps have expertise with a specific evidence-based practice, staff who have specific interest or skill that will move our system along. We'll also understand the material resources we have at hand, and we'll be able to inform professional development planning. We'll be able to get a sense of what resources we don't have, and we'll also be able to point to the staffing that exists and that doesn't exist and that we need to advocate for. We want to pump the brakes for a hot minute. Are we good? Is this making sense to people? Can I get 20 to 25 yeses in the chat? Thumbs up. Thanks, Lynn. You need to make sure you're with me. It's the end of the day. All right. You're with me. I appreciate it. Some other needs assessments. We did an SEL needs assessment early on in our work, trying to figure out, like, what do we have in terms of, and what do we need for curriculum? I talked about the EBP needs assessment. I'm not going to get into that too much because we're actually going to take it today. I'm going to ask you to complete the EBP needs assessment in real time. And then a reflection on needs, our student level needs, like what are our kids coming to the table with in terms of presenting issues. So I've talked about the overarching idea of needs assessment and what it's going to produce for us. Let's talk about a specific tool that will offer an opportunity to engage in needs assessment, the SHAPE system. This is a free tool. It's a web-based tool, the School Health Assessment and Performance Evaluation System. And we're going to use this to monitor the progress that your school or district is making towards adoption of the national performance measures, the quality domains. So when you really engage in the needs assessment process through the SHAPE system, you're really measuring the health of your mental health system. Do you have the domains? Are you adopting the domains that make up a comprehensive school mental health system? You're going to be able to monitor that over time. I think it's going to be way better if I just show it to you. So here we go. Don't look at my password. It's ridiculous. Let's take a look at each of the pieces of the SHAPE system. I'm going to jump into, I have like 12 profiles in here. So let me get to this one. Okay. Normally you'll just log in and you'll go right to your specific page. So this is what it looks like. This is the just the demo page, but you'll see a few things at the top here. Okay, you've got the school mental health profile. I'm going to talk about that later, but really what this will produce is an opportunity for you to reflect on what students do you serve and what data systems do you have? What does your staffing look like? And what services and supports do you have? So this is an opportunity for us to really get a broad sense of what does your system orient to in terms of kids and services and staffing. As we continue to march through these tabs, this is the one that is really all about needs assessment. It asks you about needs assessment, but it also happens to be a needs assessment tool. There are the domains laid bare for you: teaming, screening, impact, funding, and sustainability. Each of these is going to, each of these is a component of the larger assessment. So this is just one domain. And if I pull this up, sure. You're going to get a sense of what the questions look like. It's taking a minute to load. Bear with me, my friends. There we go. So there'll be a description of the teaming domain, and it will kind of orient the team to, here are some of the questions that you're going to be asked relative to teaming. This is what we're talking about, so a definition of teaming. And then you'll get into some questions. It will talk about, it will give you best practices so that you can reflect on, all right, well, it's asking me this, but I'm really not sure. You can, orient to the best practices, and then you can get a better sense of what that question is getting at. So I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I did want to give you a little bit of a sense about what we're talking about when we talk about the SHAPE systems quality assessment. Ultimately, when you complete the full assessment, you're going to be able to get this summary report, which I'm not going to show you because I'm going to show you a sample summary report after I go through this piece. There's a resources section. You can filter on all kinds of different things, and we'll pull up free resources for you to scoop up related to the domains of a comprehensive school mental health system. This is one of my favorite pieces of the SHAPE system, the screening and assessment library. Let's pretend like I need a measure of anxiety. It's for screening. It needs to be for a 13-year-old. They only speak Spanish. The student's going to report it. It needs to be free. Well, there you go. Free measures. at your fingertips. Generalized anxiety disorder 7 scale. Info sheet on the entire scale, scoring and interpretation, access to the measure, info on basically everything you need to know to deliver this measure. Make sense? We like it? Who's going to use the shape system for the screening assessment library? A couple people. Emmanuel, I saw your mouth drop. You're going to use it too. Cut it out, buddy. All right. So the only other thing, trauma responsiveness. You could add other people to your team. It's good stuff. Rather than having me, sorry, my slides are all over the place. Rather than having me pull up a fake, a report, I'd rather show you this. I'm going to copy this into the chat here. This is the Rennie Sanchez Regional School District SHAPE Summary Report, which is not real. But I do want to show you what you will get by completing the quality assessment. This is the overview page. It's going to show you domain by domain how you're doing. I'm going to be honest with you. These are hard questions. You're not going to do well at the beginning. There'll be some bright spots, but mostly it's going to be, wow, we've got some work to do. That being said, I would rather know what I have to work on than pretend like all is well. So let's be okay with the fact that you are leaning into a very real problem and that you have more info than many have around how to actually affect change within your system. So this is helpful in terms of kind of like an overview, but then you get into the specific domain reports, and now we get a really nuanced view of how we're doing with teaming, of how we're doing with needs assessment and resource mapping. So I guess like I want to take just a couple seconds and have you take a look through this report. Maybe let's just go to, the right here, early intervention and treatment services and supports. We can see that on the screen. You're good? Yeah. You tell me if this is your report, you're pulling this up with your team. What's something that is a relative weakness that you think you're probably going to have to work on as a team? What do we think? Type in the chat, come off mute. None of you have come off mute yet, by the way. I'm keeping track. What do we got?
Looks like they have an issue with monitoring.
Dawn, fantastic. Monitoring student progress across tiers. They're not doing it, right? At all. I can think of some activities that could move the dial on that a little bit, but would I have known to do that if I didn't take this assessment? Probably not. Thank you for coming off mute, Dawn. 1,000 points. What else? What else we got? How about a relative? Oh, Lindsay, go ahead.
Just going to say that clearly the crisis response needs some work.
Yeah, it's not happening, right? And if this is being reported by your entire team, well, that's a pretty strong indication that that's something you need to work on. What's something that maybe they can pump the brakes on, do a little later, or capitalize on by like standing up this bright spot? What do we think?
Their tier 3 services.
They're doing pretty good there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would want to ask questions about that, like which tier 3 services are we talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Does this make sense? Use of this?
Yep.
This is really powerful information to guide action planning. It's going to help you to prioritize, but it's also going to help you to say, like, we're doing this pretty well. Why are we doing that pretty well? And how can we expand that? Cool. So when I'm talking needs assessment and resource mapping, and I'm talking systems level, the SHAPE system is where it's at, especially for comprehensive school mental health. I can take a hard look at these data and really generate an action plan that is going to target specific areas of need and generate discussion. Because what happens when you sit your team down and you say, friends, we all kind of collectively reported that we don't have multiple and diverse funding and resources. Like that is a discussion starter for sure. It generates action, it generates questions. It's meant to drive discussion. And I think if you use this effectively, you can get to an action plan that has real meaning for your district. Okay? let's get back into it. There is this other needs assessment that I had mentioned before, the evidence-based practice needs assessment. This was, we built this out in response to early work where we were really reflecting on the fact that, like, we don't know what our people are capable of. We don't know if they're able to do tier 3 therapeutic work. We don't know what kind of therapeutic modalities they're employing. We don't know what they're using for curriculum. We don't know. We don't know what therapeutic resources they implement, what training they have, what training they want. So the evidence-based practice needs assessment is an attempt at asking your service providers, what do you have training in? What do you want training in? What are you currently providing in terms of services? What would you like to provide in terms of services? And what's your level of readiness to support students that present with, for example, anxiety, depression, trauma? This information is really, really important for a few different reasons. One, you're going to gather an immense amount of information that can inform professional development planning for the next several years. You're going to know where the bright spots are. You're also going to know where there is a dearth of practice, where people are simply not doing the thing. You're going to identify early adopters. You're going to find the people that you can leverage to pilot practice who are already doing, for example, CBT or DBT, who are already implementing social thinking or second step. Lastly, and this is the insidious side of it, but it lowers the temperature around evidence-based practice. I'm sure that some of you have experienced the case where staff are like petrified of evidence-based practice, but when they go through this, they're inevitably checking off some things and seeing that evidence-based practice doesn't have to be scary. So to that end, I would like for you to all ready up to take the evidence-based practice needs assessment. Now, I'd like for you to go through this quickly. I just dropped it in the chat. Please don't wax poetic over your answers. Click around, you know, first thought that pops into your mind around the specific question you're being asked. Let that be the thing that you drop in there. What I would prefer we do is take a look at the data so that we can see together the meaningful data that this produces. Is everyone able to access that assessment? Yeah, okay. I'm going to orient to getting into the assessment so we can look at the data in real time. As you go through this, I'm going to explain a little further. There's this section called evidence-based interventions. Think lowest level intervention, simple stuff, teaching social skills, daily check-in, providing fidget objects. This is the stuff everybody's checking on. We're lowering the temperature around evidence-based practice. The next section, evidence-based programs. So think curriculum-based things. Think second step, break free from depression, coping cat, zones of regulation. Stuff where they're kind of marching through curriculum. And then lastly, evidence-based therapeutic approaches. Stuff that ends in T, cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, trauma-focused CBT, RDBT, ACT. Do you have training? Are you interested in training? Do you not have training? Are you currently doing this thing? Early adopter identified. It also asks about, are you comfortable supporting students with motivation problems, sadness, depression, test anxiety, panic? So we're getting at, like, what are the specific presenting issues that we need to ready up our staff to address? Mark, this assessment is designed for school-based mental health staff. So really, I would provide this to our school counselors, school psychs, adjustment counselors, and social workers. Make sense? Awesome. All right, are we close to being done? Almost. I'd like to look at these results with you. Right now, you're serving as a barrier to that because you're taking too much time. Almost there. Okay. As you finish up, I'm going to start in. There's some data in here from a previous session, so we can use that to take a peek at. I do want you to get the experience of kind of going through it. It doesn't take long to complete. I mean, really, it's only been like 2-3 minutes. Right away, I get a sense of like, what basic EBIs do you already implement? This is giving me some good information to understand kind of from my support staff standpoint, what are we doing at the basic level? But this is where the data starts to get really, really meaningful. When I look at this, what evidence-based programs do or could you use in your practice? So when I'm looking at the blue bar, those are individuals with no training. So it looks like this is a group of individuals that have some training around PBIS primarily, and a lot of people are implementing it. But I want to find something like, let's find something where there is a lot of blue. Coping cat, steps to respect. That's an area of opportunity. I might want to take a look at that, like break free from depression, no training. Okay. And now responses are coming in. I appreciate that. So I want you to think of it like this. This is going to inform the discussion you have around like what is actually already happening in our district. I can see that PBIS is happening. I can see that zones of regulation is happening. And what do people want in terms of training? Well, they seem to want I can problem solve. They seem to want coping cat, break free from depression. I think the other thing that's interesting is taking a look at, we have training next to we're already implementing. If those two bars are pretty high, it's telling me a couple things. We've got some people implementing, and we've got some people who have training and maybe they're not implementing. So this is just a quick scan, but it produces a lot of meaningful information around what's actually happening in your district, who wants what for training, what training already exists. And then when I go down here to therapeutic approaches, it's the same deal. Looks like, and I'm going to pretend like this is district data. Looks like this district has some implementers for cognitive behavioral therapy. Looks like there is not a lot of work going on around family therapy or around exposure therapy. Interested in training, lots of people want REBT, lots of people want solution-focused brief therapy. Okay, so does this make sense to people? This is a way for you to capture your service provider's readiness to deliver evidence-based practices across multiple, I guess I'll say, with multiple levels of intensity, from the basic all the way up to therapeutic modalities. I could use this information to glean what I should do over the next 2 to 3 years in terms of a professional development plan, and it is informed by data from the people that will receive that professional development. Okay, let's head back to the slides. I don't know why it keeps doing this. It keeps kicking me back to, there we go. So having taken that assessment, how did that feel? In the chat, come off mute. Have you ever like assessed your readiness to engage in evidence-based practice in that way? Do we feel like this would be a meaningful activity to send out to your practitioners so that you can get a sense of what's happening and what's not, what training is necessary? What do you think of this whole thing? Bryn offers, I feel like this also gives us somewhere to build off of for PD facilitators as well. 100% Bryn. Yeah, this is powerful data for you to share with others. This would be appropriate for my counselors. Thanks, Dawn. Yes, I think this would be excellent for our mental health staff. Thanks, Jen. Good to see Jen. Okay. Helpful, and staff just need to be reminded it's okay they aren't trained. Yeah, Gretchen, really a strong point. Like we want them to be honest because, and we want to tell them like, it's okay. Like you can say, no, I don't know what I'm doing with this piece.
Yeah. That's the one thing I think some staff would be afraid of admitting, but why would they think this? the district would think they were trained in it because the district hasn't offered training in it. Do you know what I mean? But I think sometimes
Yeah.
people feel like they have to hide what they,
Sure.
you know.
You would lose the early adopter piece if you made this anonymous, but if that's what you have to do to get honest info, okay, that's fine. So again, this is free stuff. Please take
John?
this and steal it and run with it. Lynn, what do you got?
I think sometimes too that, like, I know just in using this in our district with our clinical staff, people feel like they should already be using this. And I know somebody just made that point. How can they be using it if the district hasn't provided any training on it? But there's always kind of that feeling that comes from administration that, well, haven't you gotten this in your clinical training? Why do you need us to provide this training for you?
Yeah.
So there's some of that, I think, that exists for people as well that makes it difficult.
I think it's a fair point, Lynn, and I don't want to like remove any expectations around individuals coming out of training programs being ready to provide some good care. Because quite frankly, yeah, you should. But that doesn't mean that we're off the hook from providing ongoing and meaningful professional development to our people. We can't expect, right. We can't expect that people are going to just sustain their practice over time with no reinforcement. So this can help to get at that reinforcement and what needs to be offered. And it can also be incredibly useful when you've got a diverse staff that perhaps has different and varying levels of experience and licensure, and who have entered into the field at various different points over the past 20 years. It's the case that training programs have changed dramatically over the past 20 years. So something to just bear in mind. This can cut through a lot of the noise and get you some good info. Okay, let's talk resource mapping. Active process to identify, visually represent, and share information about internal and external supports and services to inform effective utilization of those resources. I guess I'm curious, has anyone here engaged in efforts to kind of map out what you have in terms of resources, services, external supports? Yes or no in the chat? We should get about 30 responses in the chat because I know everyone is super engaged. Lynn has, thanks Lynn, appreciate that. A couple no's. Yes for academics, but not for SEL. That's important distinction, Heidi, I appreciate that. No, not sure, needs to be updated. Yeah, that's a fair point, we gotta keep doing this. Okay, so it's a mixed bag for sure. I guess I'll say this, if you don't resource map, then everyone is unaware of what you have and what you can leverage. And that doesn't lend itself well to being able to be like nimble and effective in that, right? So it's an important step. In the SHAPE system, that district mental health profile, you can consider that to be a big piece of your resource mapping efforts. You're gonna understand the staff that you have, the kind of staff that you have, the total number of staff. Are they community employed? Are they school employed? This is really going to help if you've got a big system and you're trying to keep tabs on the many different staff members that exist between schools. I think it also helps to show the diversity of staff roles that exist, especially within Massachusetts. I know I talked to Paul about this an awful lot, but like, we're different in Massachusetts. We have this role, adjustment counselor, that a lot of other states don't have. In fact, I want to say we are the only one, and that creates a very strange dynamic between our different service providers. I am going to talk about that very directly at the end of this discussion, of which we only have 24 minutes left. Oh my God. Okay. You're also going to map your services and supports. We need to know, oh, Don's got a question. Would we include on our town resources? Avon is super small, we share resources with the town. I think that makes sense. I think you should, because ultimately, if you're going to leverage it for school-based stuff, we need to know what the FTE is for the school. Good question. This is going to help you to understand at the macro level, what are you actually doing? Like, what things have you accomplished? Do you actually provide tier 1 services and supports? Is this happening in all schools, some schools, maybe one school? So again, we got to look at the big picture but then we can get into the minutia of our action planning using the shape system reports. Make sense? Okay. Data collection and use. This is a big one. If you have not attended the 10-hour series on psychosocial data across all tiers, well, here are the slides. There you go. This is a wonderful slide presentation to look at on a Friday night if you're struggling with sleeping. It's like 250 slides. It's a bad scene. Don't do it. At the end of the day, we need to know what data we're collecting, what we're using it for, how we're using it. Is it to identify kids? Is it to monitor progress? Is it a fidelity check? What are we talking about here? And I think what you'll find is that most of the time, this is not filled in. There are a tremendous number of data systems that don't exist, that are really critical, but that we don't have. So I guess I want to do a quick check because I think this is an instructive ask. Yes or no in the chat. Could you tell me tomorrow how many kids are eligible for tier 2 services in your district? Upon request, could you give me that info? Yes or no in the chat? Let's be honest. Yeah, lots of no's. Why is that important? Well, if we don't know how many students are eligible, how many students are enrolled in services, we never get to understand whether or not we actually have the capacity to support those students. We never know, we really can't report out on the efficacy of our efforts to enroll and move students through programs, through services. That's one example of many examples of data systems that just simply don't exist, but they probably should. Like how many risk assessments were conducted last year in your district? How many 51As were filed last month for grade 5? Like the minutia of this data is really important. So this is the chart that's produced as a function of completing the school mental health profile. I love this because it's a nice visual representation of what you're doing across specific areas of need. Like, what are we doing for depression in our district? Gosh, doesn't look like a lot. What are we doing for anxiety? What are we doing for social and emotional skills and character development? Macro level, but important. Because if we find an area where we're like, oh my God, we don't do anything to address the anxiety of our kids and they're losing it. That's the thing that they need the most. Really helpful to be able to just check ourselves over time. I'm not going to do this activity, but you can steal this for later to maybe do with your team. There's a Jamboard here with an MTSS triangle. And I got to give massive credit to Paul. One of the first times I met Paul, he walked through this activity with me, and it was really helpful to be able to understand what services and supports we had across all tiers. I think it's another way for us to understand our needs, to understand the resources we have, to understand how we orient the kids. Gretchen, no worries.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to gloss over this because there's one more activity I want us to do before we leave. But, to Dawn's point, mapping those things that relate to community-based services and supports is important too. And also ensuring that you're not just accounting for the mental health needs of kids, the behavioral needs of kids, the academic needs, but this idea of social influencers of health and education. Food insecurity, housing insecurity, access to medical care. Like, these are things that we need to account for as we build out our comprehensive school mental health system. Because quite frankly, a kid's not going to enroll in services and function well in services if they have no access to food. It's just not going to happen. So understanding social influencers of health and education and how schools can contribute to resolution of those problems, big piece for us to consider. And there's a great article here you can take a look at. These are two databases that I would definitely recommend taking a peek at. The Network of Care database is ultimately something that you can use to find providers around your region. Super helpful. Take a peek at it. There is a piece also through interface that will allow for you to scoop up individual behavioral health practitioners. So just food for thought in terms of like leveraging your community-based mental health practitioners and so that you can augment what you're doing in-house. I want to talk a little bit about professional development planning, and then I want to get into an activity that will close us out. Ultimately, when we're talking about PD planning, I'm going to point back to that EBP needs assessment as a pretty huge piece of the puzzle. I'm curious about, like, these are questions I think are worth asking about professional development planning. What does PD currently look like for your counseling staff in your district? If you're pointing them at the Eureka Math session, I'm not thinking that that's moving their practice, right? We need to tailor our PD for our people. Do you have internal capacity? Do you need to get external facilitation? Questions to ask. How can you ensure that there's uptake with the PD? That we're not like spray and pray training them and then expecting that they're just going to go off and do the thing. Is there coaching? Is there follow-up? Is there an opportunity for practice? Is there an opportunity for train the trainer kind of model established? What components other than the PD session serve as supporting structures to sustain that growth? Like I'm talking about clinical supervision, coaching, are those pieces of the puzzle when we're developing our PD plan? Because if we're just going to deliver a session and walk away, the chances of it sticking are very slim. Again, consider this tool when you're building out your PD plan. Something that's going to give you really meaningful info about what people want for training, what they already have for training, who you can leverage to maybe serve as a mentor or coach to get that training off the ground. We can skip this. I'm going to skip that. I do think it's important for us to talk about this, this idea that, you know, we have different people who are ready to address the needs of kids or who are ready to lean into implementation and innovation at different points. Diffusion of innovation theory is what I'm talking about here. It's really this attempt at categorizing people's readiness for adopting innovations. What I hope you'll get out of delivering an EBP needs assessment is this category right here. The early adopters, those people that you can use to pilot practice, those people that you can use because they're ready to go. They are enthusiastic, they want to do the innovation, they want to do the practice, and you can use their success as a jumping off point to start to scoop up people in the early to late majority. Everyone needs training and implementation support, but there are going to be some individuals that are going to need coaching. They're going to need additional assistance to be able to get it off the ground. We can't expect that everyone's just going to take it and run with it. So our PD planning has to account for the level of readiness of our very diverse staff members. I would strongly recommend that we're considering a bifurcated approach with PD. It can't be the same thing for everyone. If you're trying to install something that's tier 1, okay, appropriate. PBIS, for all, by all, explicitly teaching behavioral expectations and how to do that. Yeah, everyone should know how to do that. So including your school-based mental health staff in that is important. But we do need some targeted and specialized training and coaching for our school mental health staff. That's important to consider. What are we providing to them? Because if it's more of the same, if it's what our teaching staff is getting, that might not be enough. That's not going to support tier 2, tier 3 implementation. We want to avoid train and hope. We got to check the fidelity of their, we have to check to make sure that they're actually doing the thing after the training and provide coaching and support. We're going to generate buy-in by providing data to support the why, and that EBP needs assessment could be a big piece of that. Well, you know, 80% of staff said that they wanted training in CBT. That's why we selected this. Pretty important data to consider. I think this is one of the most important things in my mind around PD planning long-term, which is if you provide a training in this year, what happens to the staff member that you onboard next year? Are they going to get that training? How are you accounting for that? Or are we just assuming that through osmosis, they're going to be able to get that training? Stuff to consider. Last part of the presentation, we're going to go quick with this so that we can get to the activity. But I think it's, you know, what we've talked about today, needs assessment writ large, some tools to do that. We've talked about resource mapping and the importance of understanding what you have, visually representing it, sharing it broadly, understanding the gaps. We've talked about the importance of PD planning being directly tied to that needs assessment and resource mapping and to your provider's readiness to provide evidence-based therapeutic care. What about how we're actually leveraging the staff that we have employed in our district today? Let's have a discussion about this. Roles and caseloads. There's a lot to consider here. I have seen it all at this point. I've seen a tremendous diversity of staffing models across the state, made more complicated by role confusion, made more complicated by the definition that we ascribe to a specific staff member, what we tell them they should do, what they've historically done. I think it's important that we consider these two categories, roles and caseloads, really closely, because you can have the best comprehensive school mental health system in the world, and if you've got staff who have no defined role, who are not being supervised effectively, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. So we got to ask ourselves these questions. How are we leveraging staff across tiers? How are we assigning caseloads? How do students gain access to staff? How efficient are the caseload assignments and staffing models we've adopted? So rather than the discussion, I guess we could talk about this real quick. Do specific roles in your district manage specific tiers of support? That's a big question. Because if we're parsing out tiers of support, that means that we've got a tier 1 person, a tier 3 person, maybe a tier 2 person. What does that caseload look like? What does it look like to refer to those individuals? That could be messy. What about domains of need? You've got your academic person over here, you've got your mental health person over here, someone back does post-secondary, and then we say we're going to talk about the comprehensive needs of kids, but we don't. Lots of fractured service delivery, really inefficient caseloads that are absurd to manage. I think let's get into this. This is that last activity I wanted to engage in. I just dropped a link in the chat. And I'm going to show you what this looks like. So I've created a bunch of different grids. Claim a grid by typing your district name in the top line. You can claim any grid you want. You're going to type your district name in it right here. I could type Bethune. I'm not gonna. Okay. And what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to check off these little boxes. School counselor, school psych, school social worker, and adjustment counselor. Yes, I have separated those two. Why? Because y'all do that too. There's only one license. It's school social worker and adjustment counselor, but we treat these two things separately sometimes. Just saying. So what I'd like for you to do is to fill in this grid. I'll give you 3 minutes. So work quickly, please. And if you only get to focus on the first 4, that's fine. School nurses are a part of the discussion for sure, but focus on those first 4 columns. What we're gonna get out of this is an ability to reflect on something really, really important relative to staffing models in Massachusetts. I can see that people are in here, they're moving through, they're claiming their grids. This is good. We're moving quickly. I don't see everyone in here, but okay, we got some more grids down here that are being used. To make sure we're doing our best to engage in this practice or this activity, because the more data we have in this activity, the better. It's going to be really, it's going to be a way better sell when I show you what happens at the end of this. I'll give you 2 minutes, 2 more minutes. So I've done this a few times with different groups of people. So I'm going to have at the ready the other results I had, but I want you to see the results that we get here. Give me a quick thumbs up or yes in the chat when you finish, all right? Thank you for that. We got some people done. Okay. Excellent. So I'm already seeing some really cool stuff. Okay. One more minute, or are we good? Dawn's good, cool. We got some good info in here. This is helpful. Okay. I'm going to show you the preliminary data, and I want to have a conversation about it. So this is the aggregate data that is being pulled in from all of the info that you're providing from your various districts. What do you notice about this in terms of staff utilization across districts? What's a takeaway for you? $1,000 question.
We're possibly underutilizing our school nurses.
Wonderful. That's a great reflection. Okay.
And our school counselors.
There you go, Lynn. I'm going to say this. We're underutilizing our staff writ large. Potentially. We're also utilizing our staff in incredibly disparate ways. Between districts, I thought, right, Mark, consistently inconsistent. I love that. Take a look at this, just as an example. I thought that if there was one consistent feature that we would find on this grid, it would be that only school psychs are doing special education eligibility testing. We broke that rule tonight, my friends, or this afternoon. I don't know where I am. So what does this tell me? What is the big takeaway that I'm going to take from these data? Is that the onus is on you to define the roles and responsibilities for the staff in your district. And that you can certainly allow for historical assignments to march on in perpetuity, but you may be underutilizing your staff pretty dramatically. So I would ask for you to reflect on this. I would ask for you to maybe take a look at someone else's grid. Because at the end of the day, it may be the case that you're not utilizing staff as effectively as you could be. Can you see the new grid that's up here?
Yeah.
This is the historical data that I've gathered from other districts. It's a mess. There's no consistency. So as you're designing your system, I'd ask for you to really reflect on what can I actually ask of my school counselors, school psychs, school social workers, adjustment counselors. Because right now, it may be the case that you are assigning them responsibilities based on a historical understanding of these staff that is flawed and outdated. Fair? You with me? We good? Okay. We're going to kick this into the end. I'm going to say two things. If we're parsing out domains of need by role, I worry about this. I worry about it a lot. That means that our kids are split between multiple service providers. What's their experience like and how efficient is that? Same with tiers or levels of support. Think about it. We can get into this deeper as we go through the Thriving Mind series. This is a 1-hour introduction to 3 topics that could take 12 hours to talk about. Okay, but I want to get your, I want to get you oriented to these problems of practice as we start to march into the longer training series. We've adopted a comprehensive staffing model in Methuen. We don't care what license you have. You will be assigned a caseload, and you will be assigned license-specific tasks, or I guess projects. If you're a school psych, great, love it. Do you buy into our system? Can you provide services across all tiers of support and all domains of need? I love it. Your project will be testing. School school counselor, you're getting a caseload. The core of what you do is the same as everyone else. And if we had a little bit more time, I would show you a little bit more about the overlap between these roles, but I'll leave you with this. Regardless of what license you have, the training programs are now almost identical. In fact, check out Salem State. The school counselor and adjustment counselor program isn't closely aligned, it's identical. They're basically saying, go through this program and pick your license, choose your own adventure. So we need to start to reflect on this. I'm gonna close it out here. We moved fast. We did a lot of stuff. You were super engaged and I appreciate that. Thank you so much for being here. We got another session in like 2 minutes. So I wanna just point you to the evaluation in the chat. Some of you might be actually coming to the next presentation. If you do, I would love that. But thank you for being here tonight. More to come from Thriving Minds, and I wish you the best as you work to ready up your systems. So I'll stick around for the next 30 seconds, but I wish you the best. Take good care, everybody.
Thank you.